Hey, what's up? Thanks for coming back. If you watched my last video, if you haven't, I would really recommend you watch that before you watch this. I have to be really quick today because there's a lot to explain and I've got to try and fit it into like the shortest time possible. So, without any further ado, we're going to talk about burial rituals in ancient Egypt. So, say you're an ancient Egyptian and you're about to die, or you are planning for your death. Here's what you gotta know. So, the body, the human as a whole, is made up of three elements. The first is the actual body. So it's like a shell that carries the other two elements. It carries your organs. It holds everything. Cons with that is that it's mortal. It can expire. It can feel pain, it can get sick, and it can die. So the body, like a temporary vessel essentially. The second element is the ba. And the ba is like the soul essentially. It's like everything that makes you you. It's everything mental essentially. And then there's the ka. And the ka is like the force that gives you movement, controls the body, I guess. So those are the three elements. You've got the body, which can die. And then the ba and the ka are more like these ethereal kind of things. So when you die, your ba and your ka separate from your body. And the ka is collected by the creator. Okay, so the creator, well, it really depends what period of Egypt you live in. It's not like in Christianity where you've got God, the only God. He has no opponents, he has no competition, no one's really taking over for him or like trying to steal his position. But in ancient mythology, that kind of happens. The creator for, I guess, the majority of ancient Egyptian timeline was Amun-Ra, which is actually two different gods fused together. If you can imagine like Dragon Ball GT when like Goku and Vegeta fuse. Let's say that's essentially what happens. So Amun, he's an old god. He's from like a part of ancient mythology called Old Kingdom. So Amun was like called the Invisible One or the hidden god, but he essentially historians think he was the god of like wind. I don't really know how he became a creator from that, but there's like stuff about how he was like patron to the poor, like the poor would pray to him to absolve their sins and stuff. And then there's Ra, who everyone knows. He's the guy who holds the sun in the sky. He's probably the most famous ancient Egyptian god. So Amun-Ra fused at some point. I don't really know when. I didn't want to read it because there's just like so much to it. There's also like another point through mythology where Amun fused with a god called Min. Min is this god, right? God of fertility. Throughout like mythology, when you hear a god of fertility, you essentially picture a female god, right? Because like pregnancy and giving birth, uteruses and ovaries all scream fertility. But Min was a man, and he was also the god of orgiastic rituals, which is pretty obvious. He was the god of orgies. So essentially, he was the god of fucking. He was depicted as always having a boner, always an erect penis in his depictions, super potent sperm, I assume. So yeah, Amun fused with the fuck god. Min became Min Amun. I don't know if they like unfused at some point or like maybe Amun like absorbed him. But when Amun and Ra became Amun-Ra, when they fused, they did the dance and they touched fingers. He kind of like possessed the power of fertility still. So he was like god of fertility, the sun, and creation. So you want to achieve a successful afterlife. What do you need to do? You need to become what is known as Ak. And Ak is like, roughly translates to like effective being or like perfect being. So Ak occurs when your Ba and your Ka reunite. So when you died, what you had to look forward to in the afterlife was basically returning to the world you knew, but on a different existential plane. So you could see every living being, but they couldn't see you. So you were essentially a ghost. In the afterlife, when you passed, you basically could enjoy all there was to offer, but also you didn't feel pain anymore. You weren't affected by extreme weathers, so you didn't feel heat or cold. You couldn't get sick. Obviously, you couldn't die. No, none of the like discomforts that come with like being alive. So like you could basically eat all you want, drink all you want, have sex, which I struggle to like understand that concept, because you wouldn't feel hunger, right? If you could drink all you want, would you get drunk? And how do you have sex? And okay, so I was reading a lot of this from a book which like explains spells from the Book of the Dead and what they mean. And an example given was that, so you come back, you can eat and drink and have sex to your heart's desire. Not only that, you can come back and harvest and plow your crops without the worry of backbreaking pain. You won't get tired, you can do it all day long, because what's to look forward to when you die but to just go straight back to work? So the afterlife in ancient Egyptian culture was basically something people looked forward to. A lot of people say that like ancient Egyptians were like obsessed with death and like really morbid, and it was creepy that they like looked forward to death so much. But I feel like on the flip side, it was normal then, like just being like, ugh, I can't wait to die. And then your friend being like, oh, me too, dying is gonna be fucking sick. And like everyone just being like, dude, I'm so excited to die. Like I just wish I was dead now. So as I said in my last video, anyone who could afford it was mummified and buried in a sarcophagus. Basically, your tomb was something that you put more money into to build and decorate and embellish than you would with your like actual house. So a lot of Egyptian homes were built from mud brick, which is pretty obvious what it is. On the flip side, tombs were generally built from like limestone or some sort of like excavated stone, or if that's not available, you just literally built your tomb into the side of a mountain along the banks of the Nile. It was like nothing but the best for my tomb, you know? So people would basically put as much money as they possibly could into making sure their tomb was like the best. Nicely decorated, had all the best stuff in it, all of your like important, valuable worldly possessions were stored in it, because in their minds it was kind of like, I'm only gonna live a few decades in my mortal mud brick piece of shit home, and then I'm gonna live for eternity in this like fucking sweet tomb I've built, so might as well spend every dollar I have that isn't going towards feeding myself on having like a really nice place to spend the afterlife in. The life expectancy averaged at like 40 years, so it was like not that long in the grand scheme of things. Tombs were two parts, two levels. You had the crypt, which is where your dead body is put in a sarcophagus, and your body was put there along with all your most prized possessions, plus furniture, and they would like paint the walls with like memorable moments, important moments from your life, your family, anything you achieved and wanted to look back on. Really, it was kind of like the equivalent of like putting photos on your wall to commemorate your life. Food was often put in tombs because it was like thought that the first thing you want when you like cross over is to like eat something, I guess. Now the part that we all know, mummification. So, mummification, first of all, was fucking expensive. Like, so expensive. Some people weren't mummified and just like placed in their tombs, and with good reason it was really expensive. So, the process started with the hollowing out of your body, removing all your organs, pulling out your brain with the hook through the nose. Everyone knows that part. Your heart, though, was always kept in the body. That was really important. I'll explain why in a bit. So everything's removed except for your heart, and then the body is filled with like just cheap stuffing basically, because then your body is preserved with a type of salt called natron or natron. I don't really know a lot about salt and how it's used to preserve, so I won't pretend I do. But yeah, so that the preserving process took like 4 to 5 months to like completely preserve the body. And then after 4 to 5 months, they come back, they remove all the like stuffing they put in your body, and it's replaced with something nicer like linens or like sawdust from like fancy nice trees. And then you are wrapped in cloth and placed in your sarcophagus. And so the overall process for this whole thing took like 70 days. And that's basically why it was so expensive, but also like the sarcophagus itself would have probably been really expensive. A lot of sarcophagus weren't just like stone, but it was like carved stone. Sometimes it was carved from like iron or gold or some kind of metal. Sometimes there were jewels on your sarcophagus. Very expensive. Families would even put in tombs like things you enjoyed while you were alive, so that like your favorite games, so you could play them when you come back, and your favorite foods, like on the food thing. So let's ignore the fact that how do you feel hunger? How do you eat when you are essentially a ghost? Like, is it in Casper where they like chew food and it just falls through them? Like,
you know what the problem?
Or is it like a chew and spit thing because you only really want the taste? I just can't stop thinking about how does this even work? Anyways, when your mummification process is complete and you're in your sarcophagus, it's stored in the tomb, and then the tomb is sealed with the purpose of essentially no one can ever enter this area again. It's sacred now. Once it is sealed, it is sacred, and it is like forbidden to have people enter. They're meant to be like fortified essentially. So the above ground level is essentially a chapel, and the chapel served the purpose of your family members coming to visit you, leaving gifts, leaving food, leaving offerings, paying respects. And also families tended to hold banquets at the chapel for important occasions, I guess like your birthday and religious events and stuff. So in the chapel, they were usually quite nicely decorated as well. Usually wall paintings and like statues and carvings and stuff were placed there in your image. A lot tended to have like a carved out area in the wall that was like a recess that basically looked like a door, but it wasn't a real door, it was a fake door. And that door served purpose for the ark to pass from their tomb into like the chapel and then outwards from there. Like that's like their door to like exit their tomb and roam the living world. But like it's essentially a wall that looks like a door. Couldn't they just pass through the wall? So you're deceased, your ark, you're living on this higher level of the existing world. You can do whatever you want in the daytime. At nighttime, it was believed that like all spirits or arks would return to their tomb and back into their body, and their body was like a gateway or something into the netherworld, which was called the Dua. And they believed this because it like ran parallel to what they believed happened with the sun. So the sun set below the horizon, but they saw it as the sun dying, and then the sun would die every day and pass into the Dua. And then the sun would kind of like take a journey through the Dua, kind of like the river Styx in like Greek mythology to get to Hades, but the sun would travel to Osiris. His like thing was he was the god of like rebirth, reincarnation, and so like the sun would go to him and he would pass on his power of reincarnation to the sun, and then the sun would then be able to come back up the next day. If you watched my last video, you would know that Khepri was the god who carried the sun from the Dua up onto the horizon. So basically, ancient Egyptians kind of like had this concept that like everyone who died had their own individual relationship with Osiris, and so like they would kind of do the same thing where they would go to Osiris in the Dua and ask to be able to come back up into the world, the existing world, the next day, every night. So like you had all the perks during the day, but still at nighttime you had to pass through the duat, which was kind of like, is the underworld. It's like not a nice place. You don't want to be there. So how do you become Akh? How do you become a perfect being? How do you have a successful afterlife? In order to become Akh like successfully, you had to complete a trial. This trial was held in front of like 42 gods or something. Anubis, who was god of the underworld, conducted the trial. Like he was the judge, and to pass the trial there was like a scale, and on the scale you place your heart, and on the other, like one side of the scale your heart is placed, and on the other side it's either, depending on the translation, it's either the feather from Mat's plume or Mat herself was placed on the thing. Mat was a god of like justice and harmony and the truth and law. She was a god, but also just the concept. And during this trial, her husband, Thoth, god of writing, basically just took notes. He was like a stenographer. Anubis watched over this trial. Basically, you stand in front of the jury of 42 gods and Anubis, and you hand on your heart's on the scale, hand on your chest. I have not stolen from any man. I have not killed any man. I have not pushed over a child. You know, you just like prove that you've not committed any like moral transgressions while you're living. And if you tell the truth and you are honest, your heart should weigh the exact same amount as Mat or Mat's feather. And that's a good thing. You've passed. And then from there, you are taken to Osiris, and Osiris essentially holds on to your ka during this trial, and he gives you your ka. And your ka and your ba reunite, and you are Akh. Does that make sense? However, if you lie or you have committed certain moral transgressions, your heart will not weigh the same as Mat. And that is bad. If you fail the trial, essentially what happens is your heart is thrown to a beast called Amit, swallower of the dead, and he eats your heart. And that's a bad thing because ancient Egyptians didn't really know that your brain was the epicenter of like thought and feeling and all that kind of stuff. They thought your heart was kind of what controlled that. So your heart being consumed and devoured was essentially destroying your Ba's ability to think and feel and even know it's existing. So not only that, but you are like doomed to remain in the duat for eternity. I feel like that concept is not only horrible because like just being in the duat itself, it's like you can't leave this place, this horrible place. But not only that, you are like lobotomized essentially. You are unfeeling, unknowing, can't even think, you just kind of are. In Christianity, you've got hell, and depending on like what you did wrong, you go to a certain level of hell, and your punishment is kind of like given to you. Just being being existing but not knowing you're existing just sounds horrible. Like it sounds terrifying. So that fear was what kind of kept Egyptians from just being bad people. On that though, I have to like wonder, because a lot of pharaohs were kind of horrible people. Can they still become Akh if they, you know, have had slaves and people have died because of them? Do they get like a special like pass because they are pharaohs and they see themselves as like a demigod essentially? Who knows? Anyways, hooray, you're Akh. You have successfully passed your trial. You are now free to return to the world you loved, eat whatever you want, have sex all the time, plow your fields, plow and harvest to your heart's content. But you also get VIP access to things that mortals can't access. Like you can now catch a boat that sails into the sky, and you can visit the stars. You can even visit the gods. So that's everything you need to know about dying. Well, that's the basics. One more thing is something that's not really like documented in the Book of the Dead and is more like a speculated thing. It's speculated that if your tomb was to be robbed and desecrated, it kind of fucks with your afterlife. It causes a glitch in your afterlife. And that's where the whole curse thing comes from, because it creates malevolent spirits essentially, because you've like disturbed their gravesite. I think it's like King Tut's like curse was meant to be one of the worst ones ever. So this is where Christianity kind of adopted a lot of traits, because well, some people are buried in tombs. Have you ever been to a graveyard where there's a tomb? But also just like being buried in a casket and like having a grave site. Stories were like told across the Silk Road back then, and yeah, that's the basics. If you are interested in more of this kind of mythology and ancient society kind of stuff, let me know. I definitely want to talk about more. Like and subscribe, leave a comment, also share. All of this really helps, and I will see you in my next video. So thank you so much. Bye.